Hello everybody, Captain Sidaris here. As you surely know, it's again the time of the year where we celebrate the anniversary of Star Trek, and to start this off, I'm talking today to Squire James, the developer of Star Trek Armada II, Klingon Academy II. Hi there, how are you doing?
Not too bad, managing. Thank you very much.
So, since we have the 56th anniversary of Star Trek, do you have any plans for it?
Just the last 2 weekends, a friend of mine and I have gone and seen the new director's cuts of the motion picture and Wrath of Khan. So we've been sort of celebrating our own way with that. So I've got to say I'm quite impressed with the changes they've made to motion picture, in particular with the new CGI scenes. So it's completed it after all these years.
Did you watch it at the cinema or at home?
Yes, at the cinema. Yes, on the big screen, which was great to see because so I hadn't seen those films on the cinema screen before.
Oh, that's really amazing. I wish in Austria we had a presentation of the movies in the cinema again. To experience that would be amazing. I only know it from the TV. I'm sadly too young to have been watching it at the cinema.
Same. So again, I was born in the late '80s, so I missed most of the early Star Trek films. But it is great to see them how they were originally meant to be seen on the big screen. So it's good to see them back and as they were intended.
Yeah, to make a quick side note here, I was so pissed basically that the first Blu-ray release was the original cinema version, which cut out or didn't even present it basically the good stuff. So having it finally in the version it was meant to be, it's great.
Indeed, it's great to see it all said finally come together after all these years.
And in your general life, what are you doing? Are you a tech guy or are you in public healthcare? What is your daily business?
Well, I mean, my profession, I suppose, if I have one, is I'm a historical reenactor and a film extra. That is what I do. Partly a bit of education, partly a bit of entertainment, and a bit of acting in there as well. I mostly do periods of the First World War, the Second Anglo-Boer War, and the Zulu War. So it's historical stuff. But I've been in some other small productions. Nothing Star Trek or sci-fi related at the moment, but I worked with a couple of fairly big stars, Paul Bettany and Sam Claflin, and we did one theatre production. We did. Patrick Stewart was in the audience, so that was quite exciting to know that he was there watching as a local amateur dramatic theatre buff. I suppose he was on the Arts Council and he was there observing what we were doing. So it was nerve-wracking to know he was there watching.
I can imagine. It's the second time I'm jealous. Quite an accomplishment to be that close to a big star, I would say.
Yes, it was to realise. So we didn't know he was going to be there, and just to look out and realise, hey, that's Patrick Stewart. oh, oh my! Let's get this good. Let's do this well.
I'm not sure if I'm phrasing that correctly, but were you a little bit starstruck?
With Patrick Stewart, certainly. The other people I've worked with, it's been very professional. It's just they're doing a job, you're doing a job, and by the time you've been on set for a few days, you're eating in the same mess halls, you're experiencing the same things they're experiencing, and it just becomes a working environment. But just suddenly seeing Patrick Stewart in the audience was a bit. That was a starstruck moment. That was very daunting.
Yeah, I wouldn't think I would cope with that situation. It would be too much for me.
It took a lot to regain one's composure and say, right, we've got to just pretend he's just another audience member just watching us talk with him.
Since you are in the same age as me, basically, I guess you also started with TNG.
Mostly, yeah. It was. I remember watching the last few seasons of Next Gen with my grandfather when they originally aired over here back in the early '90s, and then with last few seasons of DS9 and a bit of Voyager. I wasn't as into Voyager, but yeah, that was my introduction into the Star Trek universe, as it were.
And do you have a favorite?
Oh, favorite series. I think it would be DS9. I think it has aged the best over the years. It's still relevant today. The plot lines, the themes. So I think yes, DS9 certainly is my favorite there. Closely followed by the original series, of course. I mean, it's why I do what I do. So
Definitely. And talking about more the original content, what is Klingon Academy II?
well, I mean, the reason it's KA2 is it's a sequel of sorts to two things. First is to a previous mod I'd made for the original Star Trek Armada, and second is to the game Klingon Academy, which was by Interplay and 14 Degrees East back in I think it was 2000 that came out, and that was a space simulator, a bit like Bridge Commander, or that kind of genre. And I liked the setting of that, and so it's a what Klingon Academy II is it's a strategy game, total conversion, I suppose would be the old phrase for it, that's set in that kind of universe, circa 2292. So the late motion picture era, just before Star Trek VI. And it's kind of a hybrid of a real-time strategy and sort of a 4X game. It tends to play kind of slow, but more of a focus on research, economy, and the tactical side of combat, a bit like the old Starfleet Command games, where individual ships would fight it out. It's more on that sort of level than huge, great fleets and just sheer numbers. It's a little more tactical. That was the plan. I don't know if it necessarily bore out by the time I added all I added, but that's in a nutshell. That's what KA2 is. So.
And basically, why did you start the project? Were you such a big fan of the original Klingon Academy and Armada, so you thought, well, let's mix them together?
I mean, more or less. I love the setting of Klingon Academy. I really got into the Star Trek VI late motion picture era of Star Trek, the sort of political themes of that particular era, and I wanted to make something that tied up some of the loose ends I felt of the original series and that particular era, going into what's known as the lost era of Star Trek, the bit between Star Trek VI and Generations, and the beginning of Next Gen, and also to bring in some of the themes and lore and storyline of the Starfleet Command games as well. Starfleet Battles, the old tabletop game, some of the more obscure and exotic races, some of the more alien races that we don't necessarily see on screen, and a very long, slow project of blending all that together and figuring out storylines. And bit of a labor of love over the years, but that's how it started. It was just I'd love to play with these ships and this feeling on a strategy level as opposed to a combat simulator level.
And I read that you already started in Armada 1, so basically around 2002. Did you had the chance to get many of the ships and skins and everything into Armada 2, or were they completely redone?
Originally, they were I simply copied them over from it was a simple port from my Armada 1 mod into Armada 2. It's one of the flexibilities of the particular engine is that you can do that. But gradually, I realized that model needs some tweaking. I can add light maps now. Again, the engine's a bit more advanced, so that you get the engine nacelles can glow, windows can light up, photon and plasma torpedo bays can light up as well. Registries can have lights and that sort of thing. So I started to rebuild all the models and started to redo all the textures and the light maps and gradually upgrade it to far beyond what it ever was for Armada 1. So it was a gradual process from simple port to let's build on top of this.
And did you do this all alone, or was there some help? Because if you do this for over 15 years now, it's quite a lot of work for one guy.
Well, I mean, it was mostly by my own hand. I did have some help with, for example, there was a model called Undying Nephilim who produced some stations for the Hydrons and the Lyrans. There was a believe German modder, the name of Fares, who made some brilliant original series ships that were somewhat modular. You could put them together and rearrange the nacelles and the layouts and stuff, and that brought all of the reserve fleet ships, as I call them, stylistically together. So it was a collaborative effort in that sense, that people helped out with bits here and there, but the final coding, the final balancing, again, the light maps, a lot of the textures and all that sort of work was all my own, putting together in the end, with some graphical help from others.
Not bad, really not bad, because the scale of the mod is, yeah, unbelievable, I would even say.
It's taken a while. It's long, slow work, but it get there in the end.
Definitely, that's true. And of course, it was more than 20 years ago. We already have 22.
Yeah, it's gone comparatively quick, really. But yes, 20 years of working on this sort of thing from when I first started with some simple coding mods just to make ships bigger and to add new weapons to things and to completely rebuilding from the bottom up, essentially, starting with the base engine and rebuilding everything.
I read that you also originally had a campaign in the Klingon Academy II version. Sadly, I never could play it. Why did you remove it, basically?
Well, it's a bit of an issue with the way that the campaign missions are saved. For example, if a ship has, say, 300 shields, and you save that on a campaign map, and then you're rebalancing the game, you go, actually, that ship could do with 600 shields. When you load that campaign map, it's still stuck at 300. It does not update the ship file when it's on the map. When you're playing an instant action type map, that's not a problem because the player's always building new ships. You start with whatever you start with, it generates those automatically. But with campaign missions where there's loads of units already on the map to begin with, you have to rebuild the map from scratch every time you make any minor coding change. So it was getting really quite laborious to constantly update the maps. And with the changes to the physics files where ships move differently, faster or slower, or they turn at different rates, and with balancing changes as well, I was having a few missions that simply wouldn't load, and a lot of crashes because of ships were expected to be in a place where they weren't, because again, the scripting was originally written for the original Armada II, where ships moved a lot faster. So it was just becoming too much of a headache to keep up to date with. But now that it's reached, as I said, nearly its final form, there may be a few updates. It's feasible to go back and put the campaign back in because I don't need to go changing any more ship files. Everything's balanced and everything's stationary now, everything's fixed. So it could be put back in. That might be the next thing to do, but we'll see.
Well, I can't wait to play this. Was it completely done?
More or less. I mean, there was one or two missions which, for reasons I couldn't figure out, just simply wouldn't load. But it was all written, all scripted, all voice acted, all the way through. It just needed more polish, and it was not. I didn't have the time at the time to do that. So especially with constantly changing the mod to rebalance things to get it to play better.
Wow, I have to say the scope of that project is bigger than I even dreamed of. How many missions were there in the campaign?
Off the top of my head, I believe it was around 20, 25, similar to the original Armada II, because I based it largely on the scripting of that campaign, just with the storyline rewritten to match something vaguely from the Starfleet Command or a Klingon Academy type universes. So yeah, I believe it was around about 20 or 25, similar to the original Armada II.
Every player, I guess, immediately also knows that there are so many different factions and ship. How did you came up with those? Were they just completely new from scratch, or did they have a base in some game or some books maybe?
Well, originally I was only going to include the ones that had featured in the original Klingon Academy, which was the United Federation of Planets, the Klingon Empire, Romulan Star Empire, the Gorn Confederacy, Tholian Assembly, and there's a race that was only in Klingon Academy called the Shakorian Duchies. But a lot of them didn't have a great deal of background lore or even stations, things of that nature for them. So there was not a lot to go on. Great for a simulator, you only need really ships, but for a real-time strategy game, you're going to need a bit more infrastructure, star bases, mining stations, that sort of thing, shipyards. So I looked into the Starfleet Command games, and again, this is where I got my idea for bringing in the storyline and the lore from those games. And I liked the idea of the interstellar concordium, very much like a motion picture era sort of Dominion and Borg kind of mix, and the Hydrons and the Lyrans, who are again two very disparate races. The Hydrons being almost unique that they fight in a very strange way with very close range weapons and then very long range weapons to complement each other. And I had a few smaller concepts that I brought in, some like space monsters, things like the Planet Killer, the Doomsday device from the original series, the Whale Probe from Star Trek 4, and smaller space monsters that appear in Starfleet Command to add as units that float around the map and attack everybody. I just thought they would mesh well with different play styles to bring in these extra sides and just again see how they played against one another. And they were something a bit more exotic than your usual Star Trek races. Again, the Tholians being crystal and just being very different, and even the Lyrans being cat people is they're not just humanoids with pointy ears. So they're all from different various states of canon sources, whether it be Starfleet Command, whether it be from other Star Trek games, or whether it be sometimes elements from TV series, sometimes elements from films. Yeah, it's a bit of a mishmash of all different elements of canon, and we're trying to make sense of them all and say, yes, they all happened, and this is how.
Sounds a little bit difficult to get as much content from all the games together and have basically a functioning game. Was it hard for you, or was it easy basically to create this project? Especially since you're not in your daily life a programmer, I imagine. It's interesting to have a project in that scope even.
I found that once I'd set on a plan, if I planned it out first and said, right, we're sticking to this, we're doing this, we're not allowing any feature creep to get in, we're not allowing any, oh, that looks cool, but no, we're leaving that out, we're sticking to the plan, then it was relatively easy, as long, again, to know what does this side do, what do they focus on, what fits their theme. From a programming perspective, it was not incredible. It wasn't too difficult. There were some things that were more challenging than others. Mostly the things that came from Klingon Academy, to try and find ways to mimic them in Armada II, because the coding is different. It's trying to get weapons that function function with no problem in Klingon Academy because they're designed to. In Armada II, to get something that does the same thing can be a challenge. But that was probably from a design point of view, the hardest thing, because it's right. Do you want something that looks right but doesn't have the right function, or something that has the right function but doesn't look right? What's the trade-off? But it was just about, I guess, discipline. This knowing that, again, sticking to that plan, sticking to the theme of a particular side, a particular faction. What would they have? What would they do? Does this have a purpose?
I just wondered, how did you learn all that stuff? Back then we didn't have YouTube or anything similar. If this isn't your day job, how did you manage it?
Since it was trial and error, it was just, okay, well, how does... We downloaded a very small mod for Armada 1 many years ago when I first played it. I believe it added tractor beams to every ship, and I thought, well, that's interesting. How did they do that? And so took it apart and figured out what they'd done. Thought, well, this looks fairly simple. I can figure out the code, yeah. And it was simple. We said trial and error. Why does this work? Why does this do this? Why does this have that effect? And just self-taught over all the years of figuring things out. Why does this break? Why does this have a strange effect? Why does it not do what I think it should do? Simple trial and error.
I can understand this for the development side, but for the designing side, I could never have dreamed of doing anything like that. It's really amazing what you did here.
I had a small amount of assistance with that. I did do a small course back in 2005 at university about games design, but it was more the other way around, that I wrote a design document for Klingon Academy II as part of that course and submitted it, and was given fairly high marks that this is a really good design document. Where did you learn to write design documents? I went, it just seems logical to me. This is how I would design a game. So it was, yes, I've done a course, but It was more, I didn't learn from the course. It was that I did the course because it seemed to be something I could do. But I don't know. I guess it was just something I was gifted with, the planning in that sense.
Going for a second to a completely different area, did you ever wanted to go into that direction, doing this as your daily job?
For a while, I did look into it as a teenager. I thought this seems to be something I'm good at, seems to be something I'd like to get into. But the more and more I looked into the industry, it seemed that there were very few jobs, particularly for a games designer, as opposed to a programmer. I suppose for every designer you have 5 or 10 programmers making that design a reality. That it was going to be a extremely competitive market, extremely high tension, stressful sort of position, because you've got to work to deadlines, you've got to work to essentially what they want to do. It seemed like it would take all the fun out of it, essentially, if I was doing it as a profession. And I think as this shows, I don't necessarily work to deadlines. If I'm taking 15 years to make something, games design professionally can't take that long. So I thought, no, this is better off staying as a hobby, as a passion of mine, than it is to try and turn it into anything professional where it would just become a chore, become something that I loathed rather than something that I loved. So tempting, but I thought it was better to not go down that avenue.
Yeah, deadline are a completely different subject in those industries. It's yeah, not that easy.
Especially when you read about these cases of fairly recently of crunch in the industry of people working 60, 80-hour weeks to complete games on schedule. You think, I'm glad I'm not in that. I'm glad I have the ability to take a rest when I want to just go and get a cup of tea when I want one. I haven't got to work into the night if I don't want to.
Yeah, it's much more healthier, I guess. But moving back to the mod, after doing so many different things, were there any features which didn't make it? Maybe something the engine couldn't handle or too complicated in your head, basically?
I mean, I could probably fill an entire broadcast with cut features at one point or another. Some were cut fairly quickly just because, I realized the engine couldn't take it. Others were prototyped, but it quickly became apparent that it was too unwieldy or just clunky. One good example would be originally I was going to have players, instead of building whole ships, you would build hulls. So you build a frigate hull or a good example would be a cruiser hull. And it would be built fairly quickly, but would have no engines, basically no systems. It would just be a frame. And you could tow it away from the shipyard to free up space to build other things. Then you would select what you wanted that ship to become. So if it's a heavy cruiser hull, for example, which would be the Constitution refit, you could turn it into a Constitution refit. You could turn it into a Ranger class, which is the scout cruiser version, or the Salazar class, which is the torpedo cruiser version, all built on that same hull. And it would take different amount of time to refit that hull into that configuration from that basic platform that was your shipyard build. But it just proved overly complex, and the AI in particular couldn't get its head around that. One of the smaller things that I really tried to get to work, but again, just couldn't get the AI to play ball with it, was the idea of power allocations. I was going to try and make it so that you could divert power to shields or divert power to weapons, engines, sensors, that sort of thing, so that you could boost power to certain systems at the cost of others. So if you boost power to shields, your weapon fire rate would drop. And boost power to engines, then your weapons and shields might be weaker, but obviously your ship moves faster. That sort of system, so that you could tweak how you were going into combat and how you were facing tactical situations. But unfortunately, again, the AI didn't seem to understand how to use that, and it was hitting engine limitations with weapon types as well, because it technically classes as a weapon. So that's just two examples of a myriad of ideas I've had.
Yeah, I guess it's always hard to find the right balance of new features and testing the stuff after it so it works still for the AI.
That's the big thing is the AI, because it's more AS, artificial stupidity. It doesn't really think. It does what it's told, and it doesn't quite know how to use things like refitting ships and power allocations. It will simply think they're buffs and just constantly try and push power to shield all the time. So yeah, if it was a purely multiplayer game, that might work, but you're still in the risk of overcomplicating things. Sometimes simple is best.
Talking about the many features and chips in the game, what would you say are you most proud of? What was the biggest achievement for you?
Very simple little thing. It's something that perhaps most people wouldn't notice, but the randomized civilian ships that, unlike other mods, the freighters and scavenger ships that appear on the map are random. They're not always the same class. They are different types of civilian freighters, different types of civilian scavenger ships. Because for many years that was considered the holy grail of Armada modding, that people couldn't work out how to add more than one type. It wasn't possible, etc. As far as I'm aware, it's many years after Armada II has become a very old game and not very popular to mod. But as far as I'm aware, I'm the only person who's managed to do it. And they're not simply just graphically different either. They actually are different classes of ships with different speeds, in terms of freighters, different capacities. And they're also completely random, so that you can play the same map over and over, and they will randomly generate differently each time. So it's a very small little feature. It doesn't really do much, but I'm really, really proud of that small thing.
So I'm curious, was it then just pure luck that I saw the TARDIS in game?
Well, that's a little Easter egg I threw in there. A couple of, I suppose, Easter eggs of varying degrees of subtlety might be the way of putting it. That's a slightly less subtle one, but it's rare to encounter it, so it is unusual. But yeah, that's in there. That's one I made completely myself. I actually 3D modeled that one completely from scratch. I've had a couple of ships completely from scratch, but yeah, that was just something I thought, yeah, why not? I was also taking advantage of the old Borg physics files where the Borg cubes rotate, because it's the same rotation as the TARDIS. So I thought, I have an old physics file, I might as well use it.
Well, it's a perfect fit for the TARDIS. Besides your work in the game, in the engine and everything, I also saw that you wrote an unbelievable amount of backlore, a manual. How much did you do, and where can you find this stuff online?
The manual, and I think I wrote a rough guide as well, should be available with the download. But I found with the manual, I didn't want to make it was already quite long, just to explain the basic concepts of KA2. And I wanted to add a bit more of the lore side of stuff, of how certain ships came to be, things that happened in the backstories. So I wrote a Wikipedia page on Wikia for Klingon Academy II, which if you search for Klingon Academy II wiki, and that's 2 in Roman numerals, it should be one of the first results that comes up in your search engine of choice. And yeah, it's a constantly ongoing project. It's as wikis tend to be, but that's, if you think of it as an expanded manual, there's a lot of stuff you don't need to know in game. It's not relevant to what the stats are accurate. They have the right amount of phasers, torpedoes, that sort of thing. But it's all the background information, that when did the ship come into service, did the ship go out of service as well, what happens after the events of KA2, just the universe building behind it, just so that passes the time, as it were, when I get bored, some story writing. So everything from, well, actually, believe it or not, the past now. I started writing that in 2019, I think it was. So I started in 2020 at the time with my timeline. From that point up till the beginning of next gen. So it's sort of 300 years.
It's extremely rare that a mod has even a big backlore, but having then a manual, basically a complete story, a campaign, everything. Wow, you invested a lot of time in that mod.
Well, I said it was a personal project, something that I found interesting, so I put my time into. Thought, well, if you're going to write a story, if you're going to write something that's playable, something that's fun, there has to be a reason behind everything that happens. There has to be why does this ship exist? Why does it do what it does? And that leads into sort of lore and backstory. And why not write that down? Why not? If I enjoy it, others may enjoy it as well. And it all just sort of comes from there. And then it's a bit circular, because you go, well, what would be the predecessor to that ship, or what would be the successor to that ship? How does that fit into the greater universe? And it starts to build a universe to it. It starts to build a setting that all this fits into this. These ships fought in this war. What was that war? What was that war about? How did that fit into the politics of the history of the Klingon Empire, the history of the Federation and the Romulan Star Empire? How did that all come to be? So it just grows and builds on itself after a while. It's self-perpetuating.
This level of detail is just amazing for me. I really like that you're doing that much world building and even preserve it for the future. Having a wiki is a good start there. Not many developers do that.
That was another reason behind using a wiki format, was one, it was easily editable compared to a manual that needs sort of constant updating, and also that it's preserved no matter what happens. No matter if my computer explodes or my hard drive melts, it's always there. It's saved somewhere else. So it can be accessed from any computer I happen to be on, and saved for posterity, I suppose, could be, if it's deemed worthy of saving.
And much easier to save compared to the many forum posts you wrote in the past, basically.
Yes, yeah. Of course, forums were the big thing 10, 15 years ago, but they seem to have petered out a little bit over the years. And whereas wikis seem to be a bit more long-lasting, and they are a bit more orderly as well. You can find things a bit easier. So hopefully it's ordered and easy enough to find one's way around. So
also talking about the future, you said already that you will continue the development. When you're done, do you have any plans to make maybe Klingon Academy 3 or what else?
Well, interesting that there already is a Klingon Academy 3. I haven't released it. It's not. It's a bit strange to say I finished it and then went, I'm not happy with it. But with Klingon Academy 2, I'm possibly going to go back and certainly revisit in terms of voiceovers, because I have this nice new microphone that's a lot clearer than my previous microphones that I had, again, 10, 15 years ago. And so that will be an easy thing to remaster. And the campaign, certainly I think I can get to grips with that now. And again, since so much of the campaign is the voiceovers, the narration, having a good quality microphone to re-record those lines, to re-record that, the dialogue, that will make a big difference. But regarding the Klingon Academy 3, as I said, I've had it prototyped for a good 4 or 5 years, maybe more. It's just a matter of, it doesn't feel quite as, and this may sound humorous because you think we just discussed about lore and depth and so forth. It doesn't feel as rich as KA2. And I'm going, it has something missing, and I can't quite figure out what that is. And I'm thinking, I need to add something to it. But to give you some background on that real quick, that is a direct sequel to Klingon Academy II. It starts off in the early 2300s, 24th century. And it's a bit like an Age of Empires type mod, that you start off in the 2300s, and then you progress to the 2330s and eventually the 2360s. So you start off with Excelsiors and Constellations, Mirandas, eventually to Ambassadors and New Orleans, Springfield classes, and you can eventually build the prototype Galaxy class. So it shows the transition from KA2 right up to the original Armada. Essentially, I've got some ships from the original Armada making an appearance, like the Keral class battleship from Armada II is the Klingon main battleship. And it shows the Romulans progressing from using matter-antimatter drives to artificial singularity drives, and 3 main sides at the moment, simply the Federation, the Klingons, and the Romulans. But it's one of those progressing through time type mods. But it's just, as I said, there's something I can't quite grasp as to what's missing in it. But it exists. It's just not ready for release yet. Which, my mods take a while.
It sounds amazing. I can't wait. But hearing that, I guess there is still a lot of work ahead of you.
Yes, I suppose so. Especially if we're going to revisit the campaigns, relearn some things I've forgotten over the years. It's been about 10 years since I last grappled with the campaigns, but we'll have a look. So That should be interesting. Should be a project.
And looking back on the last 20 years, what would you say was the biggest thing you learned? Was there maybe the game design aspect which really was important for you, or was it more the graphical aspect?
And it would be difficult. I mean, it's on the one hand, it was learning something simple like have a clear and concise naming convention for files, just so you can keep things organized. Because with something, especially with the size of KA2, you're quickly going to get swamped if you don't know what file does what. If your texture files aren't named reasonable names, you're not going to know is that file to this ship or is that file to that ship, or it just gets messy. And along with that, again, is organization, to have that, and as I mentioned earlier, to have that strict plan and sticking to it and saying, right, we're not going to get distracted and wander off into, oh, that looks cool, we'll add that looks cool, we'll add that. You have to stick to what you're doing and to keep things tight, but also to have that attention to detail, that every element has to have equal attention so that they're all fun to play. That you may have something as obscure as the Tholians or the Interstellar Concordian or the Lyrans, but they have to feel as developed and as interesting and as rich and as thought out as someone as well known as the Federation or the Klingons. That you can sit down and play them having never encountered them before, and you learn about them as you play. So you can't focus on one thing. You have to give equal attention to the whole thing to make it feel cohesive.
Okay, I would say we slowly close it off. I have just basically a last question for you. Are you playing other Star Trek games? And maybe one additional one here. Do you plan to play the next release? Are you planning to play Star Trek Resurgency?
I'm not particularly familiar with that one. I'll have a look into it. I always keep an eye out on new releases and things. I've played a bit of the old Star Trek Armada II, for example, the mod for Sins of Solar Empire. But I'll certainly have a look. I try and keep up to date. My life's a little bit hectic at times, so it's difficult to keep up to date on new releases.
Yeah, especially since the only game currently we have, which is on the newer area of the Star Trek segment, is Star Trek Online, and they produce like crazy new content. It's hard to keep up there.
Indeed, I played that for a few years, but as you say, it got to the point that every time I logged on, there was something new and they changed something, and I couldn't keep pace with it. It was going faster than I was.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little bit a job after you are done with your daily job, so it's too much.
Yes, it felt a bit that way. Yeah, it did feel a bit. I have a second job here. I'm a starship captain now.
So I would say this is the part of the video where I open the mic to you. Is there anything you would like to add? Anything is missing for you personal?
Well, just say thank you for your time and to show interest in what began as a side project really of mine from 20 years ago, to just port one mod to a different engine, and grew into a ridiculous fan project essentially. But it's good to know people are still interested in these things, and to it's appreciated. It makes it realize it's all worthwhile in the end. Other people see it and go, yes, this is clearly a lot of effort has gone into this. It's nice to know that other people see that. So thank you.
Well, I guess I and the entire community have to thank you for creating it. It's one of the best Armada II mods. I prefer it even more than Fleet Ops because I prefer longer space battles. And here you have it. Here you can really enjoy the battle and watch it.
It's again, there was an area I tried to focus on, that things shouldn't go too quickly. It should be more of the Starfleet Command style, where it's a naval battle rather than fighters. Oh, it's over in 2 seconds. It should be slower paced.
Yeah, and that's exactly also the gameplay I like. The Armada II original gameplay was, for me, a little bit crazy. The ships were out of paper. They exploded left and right. Nothing for me. No.
Yes, it was a bit manic to the original, but this is why mods exist.
Definitely, that's so true. But I would say that's it for this interview. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the game, and of course, play the game. Until next time, bye bye.